So another aspect of this is like, how lucky are we to have something that nobody else has? I mean, irregardless of having that connection, the Laurel Dace is ours. Nobody else can claim that. And so it just made sense for us to not only to help, with the aquarium's efforts to save the Laurel Dace, but also to have this partnership with them to where that, we could get, some, we don't want the notoriety, but we want to, through the efforts of showing what's going on, to bring more awareness to it, which will then bring people into our community and then therefore help us on maybe even bringing in revenue and things. So to us, it was a win-win situation all the way around.
Hey there, Podcast Aquanauts. It's your host, Casey here. If you've listened to this show before, you've probably heard us talk about the circumstances that lead to species ending up in a bad state. And generally speaking, the uncertain future these animals face is usually the result of, well, us. In our relatively short time on the planet, humans have had an outsized impact on basically every habitat to which we've migrated. We literally shape the world around us to meet our needs and desires, whether by lopping off the top of mountains, clear-cutting forests, or taming the wildest of waterways. The consequences of this ferocious rate of expansion and development often fall on the animals that also call these places home. However, it's irresponsible to paint with too broad a brush by suggesting that humans are just an 8 billion strong company of bad actors. As we've also discussed often in this show, there are many of us who care deeply about the natural world and are doing our utmost to help undo some of the damage we've caused, whether intentional or inadvertent. In this episode, we'll meet one of the municipal leaders of a nearby community to Chattanooga that has rallied behind the effort to prevent the extinction of the critically endangered Laurel Dace. We'll talk about the kinship the residents felt with this plucky, hard-luck minnow, what they've done to raise awareness of its plight, and how this kind of support can amplify conservation efforts. This is a big topic and possibly our longest episode to date, but it's a fascinating chance to highlight the positive force for change that humans can be when properly motivated. That's enough from me, for now at least. On with the podcast. Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Podcast Aquatic, the official podcast of the Tennessee Aquarium. Today, I want to talk about an aspect of the conservation work we do here at the Aquarium, which is one of the pillars of who we are as an institution here in the Southeast, and that is our interaction with the community through that conservation work. It's important that we work with the community members and see them as partners, I think. We'll get into that discussion with some of today's guests who are better equipped to talk about that importance and the role that community members can play in the work that we're doing to save and protect southeastern aquatic life. And to that end, I'll go ahead and start introductions. So across from me, Helena Gomez, you are our Watershed Conservation Coordinator, correct?
Yes, I am.
And today we are going to talk about I don't know if it's one of your favorite animals. I would assume it's one of your favorite animals, the Laurel Dace.
I think I definitely say Laurel Dace more times in the day and in a week and over the past 2 years than I have any other fish's name.
I would not be at all surprised to hear that. And that will be the subject of today's discussion, specifically the work that we've done up in a community that is it northwest of us? North of us? It's north of us.
North of us, yeah.
North of us, Spring City, Tennessee. And to provide that perspective from today's discussion, Spring City being, we'll talk about that. I don't want to spoil the discussion. Stefana Moats?
Yes, correct.
You were the city manager of Spring City, and now you have a different role. What is your role now?
Currently, I am the project administrator at the Southeast Tennessee Development District. So Ray County, which is where Spring City is, that's one of our communities. We have a 10 county-wide regions, but Spring City is one of mine. So
okay,
yeah.
And you still live up in Spring City?
I do.
Okay, and we were talking before the mics got rolling that you grew up in Spring City?
I did. Lived there, went to school there, graduated, only moved away for 15 years, as most kids, I guess, do, and then moved back home because I figured out that what a jewel it was. So I decided to move back in 2012. So
there's no place like home.
Yes.
All right, well, let's start off with a little bit of background because I've just mentioned a couple of different titles that to some people may not mean a lot of anything. But Helena, go ahead and walk us through what exactly the Watershed Conservation Coordinator does. You're out at our Conservation Institute, which is kind of downriver from where we are right now in downtown Chattanooga. But what do you do there?
So as the watershed conservation coordinator, oftentimes I think it makes more sense to say that title backwards. So I help to coordinate our conservation science across our watershed. So that often includes scientific communication. That includes working with diverse stakeholders, whether that be other nonprofit organizations, state agencies, federal agencies, local community partners like those up in Spring City, and just the public overall. So I make sure that our science is not done in silence.
Yeah, you and one of our other, what is Drew's last name?
Hardy.
Drew Hardy. You and Drew Hardy are, at least when I'm out there, you seems like you are the ones who are shaking hands with community members more than basically anybody else in the Conservation Institute.
Yes, we do shake a lot of hands. We do a lot of boots on the ground work. It's kind of the behind the scenes of protecting the laurel dace in particular. That's the species that we primarily work with. And that includes ensuring that actions are being taken to restore the habitat for the laurel dace, so that we can continue to work with that species, and eventually, ideally, we'll get into one of those reintroduction phases like we have with our southern Appalachian brook trout, our lake sturgeon, and yeah, that's primarily what we do for the laurel dace.
Man, that is going to be such an exciting time when we get to that chapter of this project, and it may be a long time,
I
long
think
time coming.
It'll be a long way down the road.
But it's important to work through the steps to get there, and we are in the early stages, I think, of that battle. But I'm glad we're working on it, because as we will probably talk about, in fact, we will definitely talk about this after I let Stefana do her introduction. We'll do a kind of brief summary of what all has befallen the laurel dace, the poor laurel dace that has had such a rough run of things. But first, Stefana, go ahead and tell us, as city manager, what does a city manager do, and what specifically were you doing up in Spring City that kind of brought you into the orbit of this conversation?
Well, the city manager runs the day-to-day of operations for the town. They don't necessarily make law, but they make sure that anything that the governing body decides to do, or what's already on the books, that we enforce. So that was my primary objective when in that role. What specifically led me to the laurel dace is through Thrive Regional Partnership, and they're located also here in Chattanooga. But we were going through a program that they were doing, a pilot program. We were one of 4 communities, and the program name was Resilient Communities. And what that meant is that for anything like weather-related issues that we were having. So Spring City, for our issue, we chose flooding, because we've had off and on flooding, I would say, for the past 30 plus years, that we've had issues specifically out of Piney River, that it flows right through our town. And so that was a year-long process to go through that with resilient communities. And then toward the end of it was when the laurel dace was actually brought up by Joel Hauser, he's with the Open Space Institute. He was also part of kind of leading us through that program with Thrive. So that's how we got introduced to the laurel dace. And to be quite honest, we didn't know anything about the laurel dace. We never heard of anything. Never heard of the name, the fish, or anything. But what struck us about the laurel dace was that the plight of the laurel dace was very similar to the plight of Spring City, and with maybe different perspectives, but still very, very similar in the outcomes of what was going on.
Okay, well let's go ahead and provide that brief background that I said I was going to provide for the laurel dace. So this is an animal that we've talked about a few times on this show before, with Dr. Anna George and Dr. Bernica Haida. I don't think you've been on any of those discussions, which is weird. But why don't you do it? You're the scientist here, not me. So what exactly, what is a laurel dace, and why is it in trouble?
So the laurel dace is a minnow. It's a small minnow, grows up to 4 inches long, lives about 4 years as well. And it primarily occupies the space just north of Spring City up on the Cumberland Plateau, historically in several different streams, but to date we can only find it in a couple. And the laurel dace is primarily suffering from sedimentation. So this little fish is...
So dirt.
Dirt, yes, yes. So dirt entering the streams. And the reason why that so heavily impacts the laurel dace is because during spawning season, they develop these brilliant colors. So I'm sure if you've been talking with Anna and Bernie, the red kissy lips have been highlighted. They also have those highlighter yellow fins. And the purpose of that, the males are trying to attract a female. So you could imagine that when heavy amounts of sediment of that dirt are entering the stream, and I believe we're probably all familiar with when we have a rain event and our water bodies kind of turn to that yoo-hoo color, our laurel dace aren't able to see one another. Additionally, those headwater mountain streams, they're typically made up, the stream bottom is made up of various different sizes of rocks. And when that dirt is entering the stream, it monopolizes the creek bed. So because it is such finer particles, it'll fill up all of those nooks and crannies in the gravel, where typically after the laurel dace spawn, their eggs will settle and will be protected as they begin to develop. So that's an additional stressor on them. And they also rely on sight to feed. So they're primarily insectivores. They're eating some of those aquatic bugs. And when they can no longer see them, they're not getting that essential resource either.
Okay, so there obviously a lot of bad things are happening for the laurel dace. That's one of the things we've also talked about in past discussions, the fact that they're kind of being outcompeted by some invasive species that are in their streams, some sunfish that have made their way in. That's the one that I think Bernie always brings up, but he has like a thing against sunfish.
Yes, the green sunfish. So farm ponds are big up there, stocking farm ponds up on the ridge. And when we do have these heavy rain events, oftentimes they can flood, and those game fish, those green sunfish, have the opportunity to swim into the streams. And while they may be native in the region, they are not native to that habitat. So the laurel dace doesn't know how to protect itself against this green sunfish, and they also have pretty large mouths, so they will prey upon the laurel dace. And then in recent years, one population of the dace have been impacted by a parasite.
These poor fish.
I know there are multiple stressors on this little fish, which ultimately is why it has been so important to bring the community into this conversation.
Superlative that Anna hates for me to share, but I think superlatives are good because they do actually pique people's attention or interest, and that is that it is one of the 10 most imperiled fish species in North America, which is crazy. I mean, it literally is found in our backyard. I mean, literally your backyard, Stefana. And we say our backyard in a more, I guess, figurative sense here in Chattanooga, but yeah, it's found there and nowhere else. So that makes it I think any animal just is worthy of protection and being saved, just because why wouldn't we? But also, I mean, when you have an animal that is literally on the verge of blinking out, and we can talk a little bit about, we mentioned weather events. I mean, the fact that we had a pretty severe drought last year in 2024 led to an almost Hollywood-level cinematic rescue of this fish from those few streams that were literally drying up around them, and we were very thankful to have been able to protect the what was left of the species, get them to our conservation institute, keep them safe, and then put them back in the streams. And we have a few that are still at the conservation institute that we're trying to raise. Now let's talk about how the two of you, how your orbits sort of intersected, because you were definitely partnered up a lot. You talked a lot, I think, in the course of putting together an event that we'll talk about later, which is the Laurel Dace Day event that happened earlier this year in May. But how did the two of you meet, and what was that? What were those early conversations like, and what did Helena or somebody else from Tenacity tell you about the Laurel Dace that got you interested in it from a community perspective?
We were in the conversation toward the end of our Resilient Communities program, and Joel Hauser just started talking about what was going on with the Laurel Dace and mentioned that you can't find it anywhere in the world but up, like Helena said, up on the mountain, up above where Spring City is. And the mayor at the time, Mayor Woody Evans, and I, both, our light bulbs just went off. We looked at each other and was like, wait, what? And he explained a lot more too, what was going on. And first of all, like I mentioned before, what was going on with the laurel dace in their habitat was very similar to what was going on with ours, because the sediment that comes off that mountain was settling in the Piney River, and which is causing, not as much of a, I don't know what the right word is, but not as much of a bed, in the river itself. So it was building up, and therefore when we have heavier rain events, it has nowhere to go except for sometimes over its banks, in which that then again affects Spring City. So we felt very, a unique bond with this fish, even though it's kind of odd to say that, but we did, see that. But in addition, we felt like that, at the time, Spring City was looking at doing a lot of tourism efforts. And so another aspect of this is like, how lucky are we to have something that nobody else has? I mean, irregardless of having that connection, the laurel dace is ours. Nobody else can claim that. And so it just made sense for us to not only to help, with the aquarium's efforts to save the laurel dace, but also to have this partnership with them to where that, we could get, some, we don't want the notoriety, but we want to, through the efforts of showing what's going on, to bring more awareness to it, which will then bring people into our community, and then therefore help us on maybe even bringing in revenue and things. So to us, it was a win-win situation all the way around. So, we welcome the discussion with Helena when her and I started talking about this. And as we progressed in trying to figure out how the best way to do what you had just mentioned with the Laurel Dace Day, it just became even more exciting as we went along. I mean, it was so cool to see how things were coming together, and how just having those partnerships was bringing in more partnerships, and it was really building upon itself, which was exciting to see from our standpoint.
So, Helena, rewind to that first time that you met Stefana and had those early conversations. What did those conversations consist of? What was your I say elevator pitch on this show a lot, but what was your way to summarize the plight of the laurel dace and make the case for why it sounds like a lot of the work was kind of already done for you and that they were already interested, but what were those conversations like at the very beginning?
Yeah, so I didn't know how interested Spring City was in this fish. Joel Hauser, as Stefana mentioned, approached us and said, hey, this is what's going on in Spring City. They're part of this Resilient Communities program, and they're interested in the laurel dace. I mentioned it to him, and they're into it. So we, myself and Adam and Abby, who are no longer at the Conservation Institute, we all traveled up to Stefana's office. And I was very early on in my position, and I thought, okay, I have to convince this woman that this tiny little fish means something. And to my shock and delight, Stefana was like, yeah, it does. We love this fish. We want to know more. How can we work together? And as you mentioned, I realized, the work had already been done. So that's how those early conversations went. And we started to discuss, what our work looks like in that region. We've been primarily working with landowners and farmers through a larger regional conservation partnership program, also deemed Ridges to Rivers, very much like our gallery here at the aquarium. That was not a coincidence.
And not at all confusing to talk about.
So through that, we talked about that with Stefana, and we said, we are trying to connect with the community so that we can adjust some of the practices up on the plateau. We can get more people involved in the significance of the laurel dace, and we understand that a lot of those that plight is shared by Spring City. So those conversations, they just started to flow, and they came naturally, and we got onto the ecotourism side of things because Spring City is a gem tucked at the base of Walden Ridge. It's gorgeous. The Piney River runs through it, the Cumberland Trail. It's a fantastic place to visit that I don't think many people are familiar with. And so we got on that conversation and thought, okay, how can we do this? And for a while, we create a lot of stickers at the Tennessee Aquarium.
Literally looking at one right now.
Yeah. And one was a picture of a laurel dace, and it just said, "Win the race for the laurel dace." And I looked at Stefana and said, well, what if we actually do that? What if we have a race for the laurel dace? And that's the origins of Laurel Dace Day. We said, why not take it a step further? Have a festival. Let's celebrate this fish. Let's bring more people out and talk about the amazing and unique biodiversity in that area. And that's where it started, and look where we've come. We're sitting in here talking about it.
And I mean, we talked about this earlier, that I mean, the race goes on, right? It's not as if having that event was the end point. It's really just kind of a mile marker on an ongoing journey that will probably take, again, a pretty long time to get through. So Helena, I have often on this show pointed a finger, I think justifyingly, in the mirror at humans, for being the cause of a lot of the ills that have befallen animals. And what I think is interesting about your role is that you're kind of looking at it at the other perspective. Like, humans can be both a really huge problem for animals, but they also can do a lot to actually help animals. Talk about the difficulty in other circumstances where you don't have that buy-in that was already on the at play when you started talking to Stefana. How difficult is it to get people to care about something like a laurel dace when you're having conversations with landowners who aren't necessarily automatically enthusiastic about this? What are some of the obstacles you have to overcome to convince them that these are things that they should care about?
Yeah, well, my roots in conservation science is very much that conservation is a people problem, and people hold the solutions to that. And I approach each of these conversations in a different way. And I do believe in saying that conservation is a people problem, that oftentimes in science, we are kind of doing it behind closed doors. And I strive to break down those doors. That's something that is extremely important to me, which means that I view these things from a human perspective. And historically, and still to this day, I believe that fingers are often pointed at people, specifically within our agricultural community. And so if we approach things that way, we are burning a bridge. And so I come at it from a very different perspective, and I'm speaking with all different types of people. You can say, all of these people identify as farmers, but that doesn't mean that they share the same beliefs and values. And I need to take that into consideration during these conversations. Sometimes it's a lot easier than other times. And often what I do find is that when it's more difficult, those conversations happen to be with the folks who have felt like they've been named to blame in these scenarios, in what the laurel dace is experiencing.
No one wants to feel like they've done something wrong.
Absolutely. I don't want to feel like I've done something wrong. I know that I have.
Especially if it was unintentional.
And that's the biggest thing. And that's a big part of scientific communication in general, is people don't know what they don't know. And our role is to teach them about it, right? Like, here's what's going on. Maybe you were aware of it, maybe you weren't, but how can we support you? What are needs that you have that we might also share? We're approaching this from two different perspectives, right? Maybe this farmer is noticing that their land is consistently losing topsoil, and they have to input every spring so that they can have a productive harvest, and that topsoil is entering the stream. So how can we work together to make sure that dirt's staying on your land? And I call it soil because soil and dirt are very different, right? How can we make sure that healthy soil is staying on your land? What are ways that we can approach this together? And Others, it's very much, they have grown up in this area, quite a few of them actually, if not the majority. They've grown up in these spaces. They've always tended to these lands, and they are recognizing the way that things are changing. They are recognizing that these droughts are becoming more severe. But one of the last conversations I had with a farmer up there was that his children aren't necessarily experiencing the winters that he had as a child in that area. Typically, by the time that it would be snowing, there's no snow. Or maybe they get a little bit of ice and they try to build a snowman out of it. But that's something that they are noticing. And so meeting folks on their level is extremely important. Skipping all of that scientific jargon, skip it all. We're not sitting in a room of scientists where you need to speak that way. And even then, I encourage that it's always good to just use plain language. So meeting folks where they are, understanding what needs they have, and not just approaching it from the needs of us as conservation scientists, and making sure that the decisions we make and the solutions that we find, we know what is going to help the Laurel Dace, but that the people are an integral part of it, because once more, conservation is a people problem. And if they are not integrated in that, we're doing ourselves a disservice, and we are doing those people a disservice. So there are varying responses, and I learn more every single day, and that comes from, interacting with people.
Yeah, it's like the issue that a lot of academics, I think, have, is that they consider their work in the vacuum of academia. And I think what's interesting about your work and Drew's work is that it has to live and breathe in the real world like the rest of us, and it's informed by the fact that it does have to exist in a real space with real people who have a lot of those needs that you just mentioned. So that's interesting that you have to have that flexibility to think about it differently than a pure scientist might in a laboratory setting, or when talking to other academics. For it to succeed, you have to give people a reason to care. The Tennessee Aquarium's podcast Aquatic is made possible by support from the Tennessee Conservationist, the official magazine of Tennessee state parks. Each issue is filled with fascinating stories about Tennessee's native species, rich history, and unique culture. It's also your guide to exploring state parks and planning your next outdoor adventure. Subscribe today at tnconservationist.org.
What I know, and maybe something that I was concerned about when I decided that I was going to pursue conservation science and ecology, was this idea, this thought that scientists sit in the lab and they don't interact with other people. Because I thrive on interactions. I think people would call me an extrovert. I thrive when I'm speaking with others and I'm learning from them. And I was a little bit concerned about that. I was concerned that I was going to lose that aspect, but I knew that my calling was conservation science. And I have been delighted to find this space where I can do both. And to dig deeper into that, there are a lot of folks in academia, in the scientific community, who are recognizing that it is significant. So it's been nice to see that evolution within the scientific community, but even better to find myself sitting in that space.
So you mentioned needing to meet people where they are, right? So I'm assuming that a lot of that involves asking them what they need. So what kinds of questions do you get from landowners when you start having these conversations? What are the things that they're asking you, whether that's about the actual animal itself or about their property and some of these programs? What are they asking you?
One of the questions I get quite frequently is why does it matter? Why does this fish
I ask that question
mean
so many
anything
times
at all? And truth be told, it might not. But that does not mean that it is not important for us to care for it, because this fish has lived in that area as long as those people's families have, if not longer. This is something that has grown up alongside them and has existed in this space just unnoticed because it's beneath the surface. And so there's some historic and cultural significance to it. But also, one of the easiest things to lean on is water quality. We're up on the ridge. We're at the highest point in our watershed, and anything that's happening up there is heading down into Spring City, into the Tennessee River Basin, and that's impacting our water quality. We have a very limited source of fresh water. So watching species like the laurel dace disappear from these streams is an indicator that humans are losing the quality of the natural resources that we rely on. So oftentimes I'll pull on that, but for the most part, I just meet people and let them talk to me. I let them talk to me, and I suppose there's a bit of psychology in it. I hear from them before I speak, and active listening. People talk about active listening, and it's a hard skill. That is something that you learn to do rather than it being innate to you. That's something that, of course, as you're speaking with somebody, you're thinking about, where's this conversation going to go? What can I contribute to it? But the easiest way to approach a landowner or to have these conversations for me has to been just simply listen to them and then respond. Listen to what they have to say, because oftentimes in these spaces, in rural communities, you may be separated from your neighbor by a few hundred acres. There aren't the community events like we get often in Chattanooga, where you can go and spend time with a lot of other people. And additionally, it's primarily an agricultural rural area, which means 365 days a year, 12 hours or more a day are spent on that farm. And I've found that oftentimes when I get out there, people just want to talk. They just want to talk to someone, and they're curious. What are you doing out here? What's going on? So there's several different approaches. The biggest question I get is, why does that fish matter? And depending on where the conversation is going is how I define why that fish matters. But returning to conservation as a people problem, if we hadn't manipulated the land, all of us together as a whole, everything we do on land is magnified in the water, then that fish might be fine. And so we have a moral obligation to do something about it if we can. If we have the resources and the power to, why wouldn't we?
Mm-hmm. So, Stefana, do you remember what things you wanted to talk about when you had those first conversations with Helena? You were clearly enthusiastic. What did you want to know from her? What were your conversations like in terms of your request for how can I help, or what can you tell me about X or Y?
Well, Joel went through a lot of detail as far as, what was happening in their habitat. So that I kind of already had a little bit of a grasp on, but I wasn't sure where with the Tennessee Aquarium on what their conservation efforts were. I didn't know on that piece of it how we could make something work together. So that's where, as far as on my perspective, was trying to get an idea of, okay, what are you looking for out of this? What do you want out of this? And how can we help you? Because that's something that obviously, coming from a small rural community, partnerships really can make you or break you. I mean, it's just the reality. We don't have a lot of opportunities outside of trying to create something on our own to have those outside, sources of inspiration or whatever you want to call that. So when this opportunity came across, it's just like, okay, we know what, we need to help in communication. We need to help in getting marketing, get the word out. But what does that look like? What are the things that you want to do grassroots, on that end of it? and how can we participate in that? So that was really on my end, more of the conversation and questions that I had. It's like, okay, what do we need to do on this and to get the ball rolling? Because, they had already done a lot of their work up there, but I think at that point in time, they were at the beginning stages of that communication piece of getting into the community. So it was, to us, really important for us to try to help them however we could, because again, it's partnership. We knew that, we had already gained the buy-in. So, that wasn't, a hurdle that necessarily had to be crossed over. But okay, now how can we make this work? Boots on the ground, what do we need to do?
So Helena was mentioning that there's oftentimes the need to answer that fundamental question of, why does this matter? Why does the Laurel Days matter? It sounds like you kind of already had that in your brain because of the work that Joel Hauser was doing to kind of lay the foundation for making that argument already. But as the city manager and a resident of Spring City, you were there for conversations that maybe other people in the community weren't.
Right.
So you probably had to answer that question too, right? So what were those conversations with your neighbors and your other Spring City's residents like from your perspective of having to make the case for the Laurel Days?
Well, the audience, if you will, for us was a little bit different as far as with my direct communication than what Helena's was. Mine was with citizens of our town, which is outside. Ours is in the Spring city limits, which is in the valley. So we weren't having to really answer a lot of questions from the farmers and things of that nature. So a lot of ours were coming from our citizens. Like they started seeing communications. They started seeing, we had banners going up. We had all these things going up. And so they started getting questions. Well, what is this? What are we doing here?
What is a dace?
That's right. So it was good for us to be able to introduce on that level to our citizens the Laurel Days and make the match to say, look, all of our citizens were dealing with, majority in flooding issues. So in that just basic, connection, they were already had a connection with Laurel Days. They just didn't even know it. And so it was fun for me to be able to relay that story and say, look, we know, like with the Piney River, we know those issues, and everybody in the town knew those issues. So it was saying, okay, what we're dealing with the Piney River and how the sediment is getting, basically layer after layer after layer over a period of 20 and 30 years. The same thing is happening on the mountain with the Laurel Days, the exact same thing. So to be able to show them, okay, that's where it matters. Yes, it's not necessarily something the Laurel Days doesn't live in Spring City proper, but what's happening with the Laurel Days is affecting what's going on in our town. And so that's why it's important for us to make those connections and understand that. And if nothing else, just get the awareness out there, talk about it. Just start, we may not reach every citizen, we may not reach everybody, but the point is that you've got to start those conversations and getting the ball rolling, and then it will mushroom, from that point. So that's where my conversations were with people, is just, them coming and asking, well, I see that, why are we doing this? What's going on with this Laurel Dace, and what is a Laurel Dace? Because they were in the same shoes we were. We had never heard of the fish until Joel brought it up, and they were in that same situation.
Now that some time has passed and this event has already come and gone and it's coming back, what is the attitude like about the Laurel Dace now? Has it shifted at all? Is there a general level of awareness about what this animal is and its relationship to the town through the things you mentioned about flooding? Do people in general seem to be more aware of it than they were when those conversations you and Helena were having to begin with, or you and Joel were having to begin with, first started?
I believe so. And the reason I say that is because, not just with the, the marketing piece of it, like I said, we've got the banners still up where they were and leading right into our nature park where the Laurel Day Stay was. We still got all of that up for people, just to remind people. But also our commissioners, our city board, adopted the Laurel Dace as our fish. It's our official fish, and
I love that.
And so we have the label of being home of the Laurel Dace. And in addition to that, for the Laurel Dace Day, which I believe was on May 17th, if I'm not mistaken, the commission made that day Laurel Dace Day.
So officially,
it's an official proclamation by our city commission that is Laurel Dace Day. So, I can't tell you that, we've reached 100%, communication with all of our residents, but I think on a level of perspective of seeing, what we've done since a year and a half ago or 2 years, whatever it's been now, I think that the level of understanding and awareness is a lot more elevated now than it was even a year ago.
Helena, I need to know, if you're going to say something, say it.
Well, so I want to just comment on what Stefana has said. Like, yes, that's all happening, like, in the city, and the citizens are becoming familiar with it. My conversations up on the ridge with farmers and landowners changed after Laurel Day Stay. I would show up, to meet with them, and I'm in my Tennessee Aquarium blue shirt, and they say, "Oh, you're here to talk about that little fish." They knew about the little fish, whether they were excited about it or not. They knew about the Laurel Dace, and so there was traction gaining there. And as Stefana mentioned, awareness is the first thing. Because then the questions start coming. Well, why are we part of this? Why are you working with this fish? What does it look like? Where did it come from? Why does it matter? And that has opened several more doorways to just start having that conversation.
Yeah. I mean, so awareness is a very important currency when it comes to conservation work, right? Because we say all the time on this show, if you've been listening at all in the past, you've probably heard us say, you don't care about what you don't know about.
Yeah.
And you don't want to protect things that you aren't aware of. So there's a 3-step process to get from not knowing about something to actually wanting to actively protect it. And it all starts with being aware that it even exists.
Yeah. And awareness, I would also say, is one of the first steps, because awareness and education is not where it stops. Ultimately, our goal is behavior change and sustainability, sustaining that behavior change. So awareness, once you get there, that's excellent. People know what the Laurel Dace is. And then in comes some more of that harder work. Then you're answering those tougher questions. Then you're having those more difficult conversations about, yes, we have this large pool of money to help support a farmer who decides, okay, I'm going to plant cover crops to keep the soil on the farm, but getting to the point where they say, okay, yes, I'm going to do this, takes a lot of legwork. It takes a lot of trust and relationship building. The Laurel Dace is an endangered species. Endangered species can sometimes be a bad word because it can instill fear, like, oh, somebody's going to come in and regulate what I'm doing on my property, because ultimately it is voluntary. It is their property. Those are their decisions. But getting from that, okay, there's this fish, it's endangered. What does that mean for me? Moving past that awareness, getting to the action, that's where all of the hard part comes in.
Yeah. So Stefana, at this point, why do you personally care about the Laurel Dace?
Because it represents people. I mean, in my, just as simple as I can say it, it represents just, Helena's already mentioned a lot of this. What happens on to any animal or anything is usually human related, and so to me, I'm not saying that I know everything about the Laurel Dace still, but I know enough to say, look, what happens to that laurel dace matters, and what happens moving forward in trying to help them matters. It's for Spring City. I'm biased in that regard, but it also helps in the greater good as well, because you've got Ray County as a whole. But then, just like Helena mentioned, that goes right into the Tennessee River, and that could what's the sediment and things are happening up on the mountain, and that watershed comes off that mountain, is probably and most likely is affecting other things downstream, not just with what Spring City is dealing with, but also with the Tennessee River. And so to me, looking at it from, putting my city manager hat on for a second, I looked at Spring City as being a place that people could come and enjoy the outdoors, to be able to come, and whether it's to kayak, whether it's to hike, whether it's to boat, whether it's to come to our parks, whatever that is. But you have to have a good place for them to come to. And so as much as we can to be able to help in that and create, not just on land, but also in the waters, that's going to be a win-win for everybody. And because we want clean water, we want to see that. We want to have, a better environment, just, on all many different levels. But for us in Spring City, it starts with the laurel dace. That's really where the core of it is. And it will help. If we help the laurel dace, then it will help with our Piney River. It will help with, even outside of that, going in the Tennessee River. So to me, it's a win-win, however you want to look at it. It really is.
Yeah, we often say that everybody lives downstream, and what you do upstream affects the people downstream. So in the South, and I'm sure other places as well, but in the South at least, you're kind of taught that, neighbors help each other. And I've characterized the laurel dace in my writings about it and videos about it, that it is like Spring City's neighbor. And when your neighbor's in trouble, I think there's a sense for a lot of us that you do want to help your neighbor out. You don't want to just leave somebody to deal with their troubles if you have the resources to help them. And is there an element of that in it? If you look at it beyond just the way that it personally benefits people, is there a sense of kind of empathetic connection to this animal that kind of goes beyond just wanting to lift up your community, but also kind of help out this poor hard luck fish? Everybody loves an underdog story, and I think when it comes to fish, it's kind of hard to think of a fish that has a more quintessential underdog story than the laurel dace. Is that an element that people kind of latch onto?
I think so. For me personally, it does. It's something that, you're right. The hard luck that poor little fish has had, it just, makes you want to pull for it, just for, again, you can look at it from many different perspectives on that, but that poor fish has gone through a lot of things. And to see it, get to a point to where it is even now, I know that the story's not done, but to even see what little bit of an effort that we've had in helping the laurel dace up to this point, and knowing that, again, it's step by step, but thinking about, having that as the story that it saved, that would be fantastic to have, not necessarily end cap all this, because I don't think the story ever really ends, but that's the main goal, is to have it to where it's in a healthy environment and can strive and to live. And so, yeah, that's definitely part of it.
Yeah.
Stephanie, I think it was you who had said in a previous interview that we had done, was that the laurel dace is tiny but scrappy.
That's
like
right,
Spring City is.
Yeah.
And I love that, because throughout history, even before the floods, Spring City has changed several times. From my understanding, beneath Watts Bar is what Spring City used to be, right? When it was Ray Springs.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And we mentioned at the top of the podcast, the laurel dace is losing its water. If a fish needs anything, it's water. But the habitat is becoming murky. Every time all of that sediment enters the stream, there's other pollutants as well. There's the invasive species. There is the parasite. And there have been so many things across the life of that community in Spring City that have been similar, and I think it was you, right, who said tiny but scrappy? Yeah.
It was.
It's like a Rocky or a Rudy.
That's right.
You just see somebody get knocked down time and time again, and it's hard not to cheer for them when they stand back up over and over and over again.
That's right.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, Helena, as you look at, the conversation that we're having today, certainly, but just in terms of the conversations that you're having with landowners in Ray County and throughout the RCPP area, and you're realizing that traction has happened, how much would you say that community buy-in on the part of Spring City has helped to sort of move the needle of the conservation story for the Laurel Days? How significant has it been that the community has rallied behind this fish and adopted it literally as their symbol? How important has that been to moving the needle for the Laurel Days?
I feel that it has been significant. As I mentioned, I'll go talk with other people now who already know what the Laurel Days is. They already know why I'm there, and through that, maybe they're more open to conversation. But I also think that it lays a foundation for other small, unnoticed aquatic species. I think that rallying folks behind this small yet scrappy fish, I feel like it's a fantastic groundwork for how other organizations and other agencies who are also working with threatened and endangered fishes can get their communities involved and say, oh, there are the people might have interest in that. I think that sometimes it can be intimidating going back to that, scientists are kind of pictured in a lab a little bit behind closed doors and in that ivory tower. I think that it can be intimidating for a lot of people to approach the community surrounding that habitat. But I hope that through anything, this has demonstrated that you can do that, and that people are likely more interested than you thought that they were. And I hope that through moving the needle for the Laurel Days and our conservation work with the Laurel Days, we're also moving the needle for other species as well. We're also, people are reading this story and they're sharing this story, and hopefully it's drumming up ideas for other folks. Actually, shortly after Laurel Days Day, the week following, I was at a conference and somebody had heard about Laurel Days Day, and they said, hey, I work with this fish in this small community and there's a brewery nearby. Do you think that I could talk with them about getting a specialty brew? And I was like, yeah, go in there. And they'd said, well, I don't really know how to go in there. And that kind of reinforced how it can be intimidating. And don't get me wrong, I've very much been intimidated in these conversations, but breaking that ice, people are into it. As Stephanie said, I mean, if there's a draw to the community, something unique, then it's benefiting them and that conservation work as well.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things that, as I was thinking through how this conversation was going to go, that we've talked about in the past through our communication efforts here at the Aquarium, are the community of Shawano, which I know you've been to up in Wisconsin. That's they're on the Wolf River, and they're one of the locations where lake sturgeon spawn. And the town has really, it seems like, kind of glommed on to and taken ownership of the fact that they are right next to this really important site for this animal down in Pinson, Alabama, which is kind of a bedroom community of Birmingham. There's a really, really beautiful fish. I mean, the Laurel Days is beautiful, and as there's so many small, beautiful fish in the Southeast. Another one that has benefited from this is the vermilion darter, which is just gorgeous and lives in Pinson. There was a jail that they were wanting to build in, I think it was Jefferson County. And the community rallied behind this fish because it was found to only be in Turkey Creek, which is now a protected, I think, wildlife preserve. And the fact that this fish existed there kind of opened the door to them protecting this land that was going to be used for a jail and turn it into this really beautiful natural space that now is like a piece of the tourism for this community, and let them kind of avoid this jail. But they've really, I think, embraced the vermilion darter in much the same way that Shawano embraced the lake sturgeon, as Spring City has embraced the laurel dace. Can you think of other examples of times when like a community has supported an animal and kind of embraced it as for having ties to its community in the way that laurel dace has for Spring City?
Yeah, Shawano is a great example. I definitely got a lot of my ideas for what we could do with the laurel dace from being up in Shawano and noticing how integral the lake sturgeon is to their community. I haven't had the privilege of visiting. It's Penson, Alabama. Penson, Alabama. But I'm inspired by their story. I hear they have a mural on the side of the building of the vermilion darter. Maybe one day we'll get there in Spring City. But another one that comes to mind is a smaller community in North Carolina who recently had a Hellbender festival, and they have rallied around the Hellbender. And, there are several different communities across the state of Tennessee who are getting the people amped up about the aquatic biodiversity that we have here. I don't think I've done enough research to know all of the little species across the states and across the world where people are very much saying this is ours, don't touch it. But I'm confident that there are some. If we can do it in our smaller communities, I'm sure that it's happening in other places. And hopefully, I do know that in Wisconsin, the state is very supportive of conservation overall. Alabama, they, much to Tennessee's chagrin, they lead the Southeast in our aquatic biodiversity, but
barely, right?
Yeah, like 2 species, but it's 2 species across the fishes and the mussels and all the other good taxa in our water bodies. But their state has really embraced it as well. And I'm hoping that as the work that Tennessee Aquarium does in our region and the work that different organizations are doing across the state, I'm hopeful that in the future, we can get to that point, like how Alabama has, how Wisconsin was when I was visiting up there, where this is an integral piece of who we are as a region, as a state. And we are fortunate enough that there are some local representatives who are supportive of the work that we do, but it would be amazing. I think it would be a true milestone if we were able to truly adopt that river protection ethic across the state, because we are in such a unique location. It would be fantastic if this was just, the start of getting all of the communities in Tennessee or the state as a whole pumped about conservation, pumped about what we all have in our backyards.
It's so funny that you mentioned the whole competitiveness between Alabama and Tennessee, and very tongue-in-cheek, but I mean, college football has its way of working its way into all aspects of our lives here. And if we could just look at our natural heritage and all this biodiversity that's here in the same light, I think maybe you're onto something. Maybe if we could just rally behind that and see that as a point of pride, that maybe there would be more of a buy-in on a community level to want to protect this, because otherwise we would just be another region and not as special as we are.
Yeah, and that competition, it extends into our scientific community when it comes to freshwater aquatics. I don't think that there has ever been a presentation or a conference that I've been in with the conservation scientists who work here in the Southeast where it doesn't come up. I was at the Tennessee Wildlife Biodiversity Summit a couple weeks ago, and it came up every single presentation, like, well, we've got you on too. And I think it does come back a little bit to that science and silence. If we're all talking about it inside our circles, then why don't we diversify our stakeholders and get the state of Tennessee in on, okay, Alabama is beating us by just a little bit. Like we can ramp it up and impress them.
Make it to the biodiversity playoffs.
Yeah.
All right. We mentioned that Laurel Days Day is coming back. What's the date for that?
It will be May 16th this year. So it's going to remain in line. As of right now, it's going to remain in line with Endangered Species Day, which is always the third Friday of every May each year. And so we're going to do it on that Saturday. So May 16th, 2026 is when we'll do it again, our second annual.
Awesome. So it's coming back. But as you look at that partnership moving forward, what does that look like now that we've done the event for the first time? The newness factor of the event may be wearing off. What does the partnership look like as it progresses in the years to come?
Yeah, when we set out to do Laurel Day Stay, there was an overall goal, right? Why are we doing this? And it was to raise awareness of the Laurel Days, but also to instill community pride in local aquatic biodiversity. So that was our overarching goal. We split that up into a few different objectives. And one of the biggest ones is that this can become an event that is driven by, led by, planned, and evaluated by the town of Spring City with the support of the Tennessee Aquarium. Because ultimately, we want this to continue to serve them and what they need. And it seems that we're headed in that direction, that we marked some of those objectives this past year. So ideally, it will continue into perpetuity as long as somebody's screaming about the Laurel Days. Hopefully, we'll have a Laurel Day Stay. But maybe Stephanie can speak to that a little bit more because she is a resident of Spring City.
Yeah, my role has changed, but my support has not changed. So my thought is that moving forward, that I personally will still stay involved with the Laurel Days Day and helping and getting that organized and things, and maybe to a point to where that I can be help more intimately than I was last year, because being as a city manager, it's a great job, but sometimes your day to day gets a little bit trying as far as the different things that you go. And so time is of a premium when you're a city manager. So now that my role has changed, I see that I do have more time to where I can be able to get more integrated into the planning process, even more so than I was last year. So my thought is that I will still help facilitate, be maybe even a liaison between the organizers and the city, because obviously, we've done this already one time. And we want it to grow, and I feel like that we've had a few discussions on ideas of how that can be, and so that's going to be exciting to see how we can make that work and get that to come about. But as far as personally, my goal is the same as it was a year ago, when I was city manager. It's just that I'm going to stay involved with this because to me, it is Spring City. It is something, as I've mentioned, something that over time they will understand of how important saving the Laurel Days is to helping, the basic stuff of the town. And, of course, as we mentioned with flooding. So, to me, there is a direct connection with that fish. And I've come to love the Laurel Dace over the past year. It is a beautiful fish. It's something that, an underdog, obviously, you want it to survive on that aspect of it as well. But it's a wonderful story, and it's a wonderful thing, I think, to get involved in, because who can't support something like that? That's my take. It's like, you may have a different perspective of it, but at the core of it, why, who wouldn't, get behind something like that? So I'm excited for next year. And one thing I do want to mention, something that just to Helena and her team did such a great job with this last year. We, on the race specifically, we have stats from that. And I counted, we had 36 different cities across the United States represented during the actual 5K race.
Wow.
And that was as far as Washington State, Minneapolis. I think Boca Raton was another one. There's another city in Florida, I believe.
The Everglades.
Yes.
And she traveled up and raced in person.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah. So, to me, and again, not to say everybody, because, I know a lot of times people do the 5Ks, because they want that, that's part of their lifestyle. So I get that. But nevertheless, they were there and they participated, and so they got to hear about the Laurel Days. They got to see what that is. So regardless of whatever their interest was at the very beginning, the outcome is the same. They got the awareness of it. And so hopefully, again, they'll come back next year, and this will be an annual thing for some people to come back to. I think we had over 200 people in general, as far as for the whole day. So yeah, it was an awesome day, and I'm just looking forward to next year and seeing how much we can, add to it, and how many more people that we can get to come to Spring City to experience what we already know as far as the gem of what Spring City is.
All right. Well, I think with that, we can go ahead and call an end to this episode talking about the Laurel Days, the race to save the Laurel Days, and the relationship between the aquarium and the community of Spring City. I think it's important that we have this conversation because all too often, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody, there's a lot of, we mentioned finger pointing, pointing it at people as being the root of a lot of the problems when it comes to the reason these animals are in a bad state. And I think it's nice to turn the table a little bit and show how humans are actually being a good, positive force when it comes to saving these animals as well. It's not all one-sided. They're just like everything. There are multiple facets to this. So thank you to Helena Gomez, our Watershed Conservation Coordinator, and to Stefana Moats, the former city manager of Spring City, Tennessee. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast Aquatic to talk about these important topics.
Thank you, Casey.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
If you have an idea for a future episode of the podcast Aquatic, send that along to me at podcast@tnaqua.org. The website is also a great place to learn more about the work that we've done with the Laurel Days and some of the stories about things like the Race to Save the Laurel Days, that harrowing rescue that we did of the Laurel Days back in 2024. And just if you just want to know what it looks like, that's a great place to go and find videos and photos as well. While you're online, if you'll leave us a rating on your podcast platform of choice, or if you have a little bit more time, write us a review. Those are really great ways to support the show and help us to have better play with the algorithm and be heard by more people. And in the meantime, until next time, remember that every drop matters.